Let's dive in. Today, we're going to tackle a question that seems super simple on the surface, but actually has a lot going on under the hood. What does it truly mean for a business to be profitable? We're going to peel back the layers and find out that it's about way more than just one number on a spreadsheet.
So let's start right there with that big question. When you hear a company is profitable, what does that actually tell you? Well, as we're about to see, the answer isn't just a simple yes or no. It's a story, really, told through different levels of analysis, and each level gives us a unique and absolutely crucial piece of the puzzle. All right, let's break it down.
Before we can even begin to talk about profit, we got to start at the foundation, costs. Because to understand what a company makes, you first have to understand what it spends. And it turns out not all spending is created equal.
Yeah, that's right. Because understanding the difference in how a company spends its money, well, that's the key that unlocks the whole story of its financial health. And that story starts with two main types of costs. And here they are, the two main characters in our cost story, fixed costs and variable costs. Think of them like this. Fixed costs are your steady, predictable friend. Variable costs, on the other hand, are a little more spontaneous. They change depending on what's going on. Let's break them down.
So, fixed costs, these are the expenses a company has to pay no matter what. We're talking rent, insurance, and the salaries of the administrative staff. It literally doesn't matter if they produce one coffee mug or 1 million of them, that rent check is the same amount every single month. They're fixed. Now, variable costs are the total opposite. These guys are tied directly to production. Let's stick with our mug company, right? The more mugs they decide to make, the more clay they need to buy. That's a variable cost. The more they sell, the more they pay in sales commissions. That's another one. Production goes up, these costs go up. Production stops, and poof, these costs pretty much disappear. Okay, so now that we've got a solid handle on costs, we can take our first look at profitability. This is where we start to see how effectively a company turns its products into profit, and we do it using two slightly different but very important metrics.
First up is the big one you hear about all the time, gross margin. This is kind of the 30,000-foot view. It asks a simple question. After we pay for the direct costs of making our product, the materials, the labor, how much money is left over from each sale? It's our first real indicator of how healthy our product's profitability is.
But what if you're a manager inside the company and you need to make a decision about a specific product? For that, you might use something called contribution margin. This metric is way more focused. It ignores those big fixed costs and asks a different question. How much does each individual item we sell contribute towards paying for our rent, our salaries, and all that other fixed stuff?
And the key difference really comes down to who's looking at the numbers. Gross margin is for outsiders, investors, lenders, people who want to know if the company is profitable overall. But contribution margin is an internal tool for managers, helping them decide which products to push or maybe which to discontinue. Two different tools for two very different jobs. Let's put some quick numbers to this. A company makes $2 million in revenue, and its cost of goods sold, or COGS, is $1.5 million. The gross profit is $500,000. When we express that as a percentage of revenue, we get a gross margin of 25%. So what does that mean? It means for every dollar that comes in from sales, 25 cents is left over after paying for the product itself. And this lays out our journey perfectly. We've just covered gross profit. Next, we'll subtract the costs of just running the business to find operating profit. And finally, we'll deduct taxes and interest to get to that famous bottom line, net profit. Each step gives us a clearer and clearer picture. So let's move to the next level. So it's time to zoom out. We're moving beyond just the cost of the product itself. Now we're asking, what does it cost to run the entire business? The marketing, the research, the headquarters, all of it. This gives us a much better sense of a company's overall operational health. And the metric we use here is the operating profit margin. This number tells us how much profit a company makes from its primary business activities. It's a really pure measure of operational efficiency because it ignores things like taxes or debt financing, which can be all over the place between different companies.
So what are these operating expenses? Well, they're all the crucial types of spending that aren't directly part of making the product. Think of the sales team's salaries, the budget for a new marketing campaign, or the cost of the R&D team dreaming up the next big thing. These are the costs of just being in business.
And you know, this is why many investors absolutely love this metric. Why? Because a strong operating margin suggests the company's core business model is sound and efficient. It shows they're not just making a profitable product, they're running a profitable business around that product. And that is the key to long-term sustainable growth.
And now we arrive at our final destination, the last level of our analysis. This is the number that gets all the headlines and is often seen as the ultimate measure of a company's success in a given period.
This is the net profit margin. It's what's left after every single expense has been paid. We've accounted for making the product, we've accounted for running the business, and now we're also subtracting interest payments on debt and the company's tax bill. This is what's truly left over at the end of the day. So, when you hear on the news that a company made a profit of $1 billion last quarter, this is almost always the number they're talking about, net profit. It's the final word, the comprehensive verdict on its profitability for that period, the true bottom line. But here's maybe the most important takeaway from this whole thing. Looking at any one of these margins in isolation can be super misleading. The real power, the real insight, comes from looking at them all together and seeing the story they tell. Let's see how this works. Imagine a company with an incredible 75% gross margin. Their product is a cash machine. But look what happens when we go down to operating margin. It plummets to 20%. This immediately tells us a story. The company is spending a massive amount on operations, maybe on aggressive marketing or R&D. And finally, the net margin is just 15%. And that's the magic. The journey from that 75% gross margin down to the 15% net margin tells you exactly where the company's value is being eaten away. In our example, the problem isn't the product, it's the operational spending. Analyzing this trend gives managers and investors these incredibly deep and actionable insights. So that brings us to our final thought. After seeing how each margin tells a different part of the story, from the product's basic profitability to the efficiency of the business operations to the final bottom line, which one would you choose if you could only see one? It's a tough question, and the answer reveals a lot about what you value most in a business. Thanks for joining me on this one.